Hello, this is Nora McCarthy, and welcome to part one of a four-part interview I conducted with jazz guitarist and educator, conceptualist, bandleader, and music director Peter Mazza, captured on June 21st, 2022. It was my sincere pleasure to have this conversation with Peter and to share with you his incredible story that is both inspiring and empowering. Peter was recently diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, an inflammatory disorder of the peripheral nerves. After being suddenly stricken with its painfully debilitating and paralyzing symptoms, Peter talks in depth about his experience and his ongoing healing and ultimately his surrender. Peter's strength of spirit, positivity, and optimism in the face of such an unpredictable disorder is nothing short of amazing. Peter also talks about his music, his teaching methodology, the joy he derives from teaching, and gives us plenty of insight into his artistic approach. Part 4 of this interview contains information on how you can lend your support by making a small donation to Peter and his family through his GoFundMe page. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy to be able to do this and to introduce you to the audience at Cadence Magazine. That's first and foremost.
Thank you.
So, yes. Let me just start by saying, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I feel great because I'm not where I was where my illness started. I feel at times I also feel scared because it's not guaranteed that I'm going to recover from this thing. But, as we talk, I'll tell you a little bit more about the outcomes. But yes, I feel great because certainly learned the value of everything, not just playing guitar, but like walking and talking and brushing my teeth and hanging out with my family. All those things were kind of taken away for a little while.
I just, I feel you. I just can't sympathize enough with what you've been through. Let's talk about you as a musician briefly and what you've been doing lately with your, with your music.
Well, I mean, lately, I've been, up to, having my illness, if you want me to talk more specifically about what that is, I will. But, in COVID, I should say, I really blossomed in a strange way because I already had something of an online presence. I was teaching on Skype and Zoom. But I started kind of like an online jazz guitar community. And really, I mean, this is back when everybody was quarantined and, whether they were, enthusiast players or professional players like myself, everybody was, finding ways to communicate, finding ways to stay connected socially and be creative. And so, yeah, and interestingly enough, since there were no venues to play at in COVID, I mean, solo guitar, which was the focus of a lot of this stuff, was a perfect thing, right? Because you could get together with a group of guitarists and talk about playing unaccompanied. And my father was a pianist, not professional, but took it seriously his whole life. And so in many ways, I mean, hearing what the piano can do, can orchestrate and kind of play chords and lines and, at the same time, I mean, I've been fascinated with the approach of trying to play a very lush, full ranging guitar style. And I was teaching people how to do that. But, even more so, although I have a really clear way that I view harmony and the instrument, my real thing is to connect with people. I feel that I went into music because I think that everybody has something to say. And I mean, we don't compete as humans. Like, I mean, we all recognize we kind of share a lot of the same, needs in life and ambitions and whatever. But somehow in music, and especially in jazz or classical, people tend to get, it's because the commerce element is so tough. They tend to get a little competitive. But I mean, for me, I think that everybody has something to say. And I was able to bring, this really diverse group of players, whether they, as I said, were enthusiasts or pros, and talk about how to take a tune like All the Things You Are and look at the lyrics and look at the melody and then look at the chords and go back to a lot of the principles of harmony and the guitar, because I'm a guitarist. So it's like, how do you put all those things together to create a basic arrangement? And then how do you embellish? And then once you start embellishing, like, how do you deliver your arrangement with the kind of finesse and use whatever technical harmonic knowledge you have to, like, create narrative, create drama, create an experience
Oh
for
my
people.
gosh, Peter, that's, when I'm listening to you describing all the components of what it takes, what you use to produce the music that you do. So I'm interested in when you're approaching guitarists, your students,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do first?
Hmm.
What do you listen for? And what's the first thing you
Sure.
think that you essentially need to give them to start them on their path, be the artist that they are? How do you find their artist within?
That's great.
Help them find it.
Great. Thank you for asking such a great question. That's really cool. I should preface this by saying, most of the people who come to me are advanced players. And I mean, they're people who have probably played for many years, maybe not professionally, maybe semi-professionally. And then there's a lot of professionals who come to me. And I really feel so touched and grateful that people who I really, in the real world, consider colleagues, hire me as like a consultant or a specialist, like a, high level business people do, right? Like you might run a company and be like a brilliant, successful person, but you call a consultant to get some ideas, right? And somebody to help you cultivate your ideas. So whoever I'm dealing with in all of that, interestingly enough, you'll love hearing this as a vocalist. I start with the lyrics now. And I'll explain why I start with the lyrics. I mean, I personally, I'm a kind of a sentimental guy. So I love all those old standards, and whether some of them are poetic or whatever the range of like that's presented in the lyrics, I happen to enjoy the lyrics. But interestingly enough, I'm not teaching them the lyrics for the sentiment. I'm teaching them the lyrics because we have much more experience speaking our mother tongue than playing an instrument per se. And a lot of the logic and sensibility and even artistry of phrasing comes from combining notes with words, because words have such a clear gravity and a purpose that we know from speaking, that it can be, if you just read the melody of all the things you are out of real book, it's all whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes, and nobody goes you to art, the promised kiss of springtime that makes the lonely winter seem long. I mean, that's the way it's written in the real book, right? So like, if you think of it as words, you are the promised kiss of springtime that makes the lonely winter seem long. There's a phrase. So if you're, and then like in our game where, we're playing the chords, we're playing the melody. So, I mean, I start with the lyrics because to me, whether you're playing rubato and really drawing out the length of a phrase, or you're playing in time, and are you playing in straight time, or you playing swing in time, that sets the context for everything else that's going to happen, So if I'm going to say, okay, well, let's talk about all the things you are specifically, and it's it starts in the key of A flat, and F minor is the Roman numeral 6 chord, and B flat minor is the Roman numeral 2 chord, and E flat's the 5 chord, etc. So I teach them about that, and then maybe, oh, well, it so happens that all of the thirds of these individual chords are the melody notes. So do we know a voicing that has that note on top? And then can we add where do we derive the embellishments for the tensions of each of those chords? And then once we kind of start putting those voicings in place, how can we move notes around inside the chord to create inner lines? So that's a whole creative and technical thing. But again, I always go back to the melody and the lyrics, because after you see, what most of we guitar players do when we're experimenting with harmony is we put everything in, like including the kitchen sink. So sometimes I'm like, okay, you're carrying around a lot of stuff now. Now go back to the lyrics and just see, is there some way for you to make that work out where it flows with the original intention of the music? And then you can edit from there. Or sometimes what you do is you say, hey, this is really difficult. I'm like lifting a lot of weights. I'm going to figure out how to carry all that stuff and get it up without hurting myself, and, doing a rep, so there's so many ways you can go about it, but that's sort of where I start. And, does that kind of make sense?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. If we were talking, if it was like about, our shared view of how to teach this kind of stuff, we'll say for another show, another interview, for real, because I would love to discuss this back and forth. Because vocally, I see things similarly, but not all vocalists are thinking like in terms of what you're saying. But it is still the same thing, because it's an interdisciplinary way of looking at the music. So yes, you're thinking rhythm, you're thinking harmonies, but you're also thinking visuals. I see the visuals when I sing. And you've integrated all of that. Like you're talking about the storyboard. there's so many different ways you can knit the emotions in with the harmonies and the melodies and stuff and the rhythm. Let's forget about it. You know, all those things together, that you're doing that in an intellectual way as well. You're not leaving out all the people that's labored hard over all of the exercises and learning all of the scales and the modes and, you know, the chords, et cetera, et cetera. You're not leaving any of that out. That's an interesting for me to because you can relate then to people that have that knowledge, but maybe don't know how to get to where you are with the expression, that need to want to add more expression that isn't scholastic, you know, to be able to generate from their heart.
Yeah, and I should say that, you know, something that I often, and just to rewind a little bit, like, you know, theoretically speaking, I'll go back to the different, well, I mean, when you think about chords in jazz, you have a major 7 family, you have a dominant 7 family, you have a minor 7 flat family, you know, a minor 7 flat 5 family. So I go through each of those qualities of chords, and I spell them up, not to the 7ths, but all the way up to the 13th. And I talk about, you know, how you build those 13th chords, and, you know, how they're used most frequently in jazz, like what are the conventions. So yeah, there's a whole background thing that I do on harmony, as you said, relating chords and modes. And 13th chords are really like when you use all the notes of the scales in your chords. But interestingly enough, you asked me where I start. So where I start is, interestingly enough, like with the melody, with the basic chords. And, you know, we have certain ways that we kind of grip chords on the guitar, like we arrange the intervals on the guitar. Like, for example, we don't necessarily spell them root, third, fifth, seventh like you do on the piano visually. You know, a typical major 7 chord would be voiced root, fifth, seventh, third. So like whatever, if everybody knows those basic grips, then I'm asking them to construct a basic arrangement with those basic grips. And then we fuse it with the conversation about, you know, advanced harmony, but also with this more earthy conversation about language and context and mood and dialogue. And, you know, so I'm kind of toggling between those different worlds. And I appreciate that you said it the way you did, that, you know, some people say like you don't think when you play. And I mean, maybe at our level, you know, professional level, you know, yes, you don't think, but I do think I tell students to think when they play, or at least to think when they practice. Like, do you really understand what, you know, what you're trying to achieve and you're practicing? Are you working on sound? Are you working on tone? Are you working on rhythm? Are you working on phrasing? Are you working on really identifying the notes that you're singing and how they relate to the chords you're playing over? I mean, so I do think that all those things are things that people should consider. And I really try, that was a big compliment from you. Thank you. Because I really try to merge the intellectual and the visceral qualities in a way that they are both relevant. And, you know, it's not just, hey man, just play what you feel. And it's not all, you know, being super nerd, like I'm just going to play all, you know, this technical stuff. You know, I think there should be a blend of that kind of earth and, like, you know, kind of outer space, you know, or science.
They're constructions. They're constructions. And you're an architect. You're a musical architect. That's the way I see you, and the way I hear you. I mean, it isn't just that you don't just go in and hear a musician, like you're saying, you know, maybe he's technically wizard, who cares, you know, going in there doing all this stuff and playing a flat piece of music that could be anybody, you know what I'm saying? Your music has depth, and it has so much forethought, and it also has reflective thought.
First thing I have to say, that having a person like you listen to my music is amazing, because you are so deep and receptive to the music. You know, not, I mean, listen, everybody relates to music in a different way. And I think, you know, one of the cool things about becoming a jazz musician, I guess any musician, but I'll speak from the perspective of what I know is, you know, being a jazz musician, and not that I exclusively like jazz. I mean, I like a lot of different things, is that the part of the joy of being a studied or trained or just lifelong musician is that you get better at listening to music, right? Like, you can really hear the nuances of the music from your own experience living and studying the music, right? So I will say, just to go back a few steps, yeah, I mean, I'm just super grateful to have a person like you listen to me, because I know that not only are you listening for all I bring to the table, you're listening it from the perspective of all you've brought to the table, you know, and that's really great. That's really important. And that's another, I mean, not to digress onto this subject, but that's another reason why I think, you know, jazz musicians should be supportive of each other. Because, you know, of course, we all have people who come to our performances and say, how much they appreciate us, and they may be, enthusiasts, or maybe they've never even heard someone like us, and aren't familiar with jazz. Whatever it is, they can, whatever level they're relating on to is cool, and it's great to have that experience. But musicians have such an incredible opportunity to help each other and to heal each other and to propel their vision and message, because we have all what we've been through personally and musically when we listen. So it's such a missed opportunity to not be a supportive listener. I'll say, and you are clearly someone who is invested in experiencing music, not only through your own music, but through other people's music, like my music. And that's really a beautiful quality that you have. And I think it's one of the things that, has, drawn us together, kept us, in an active dialogue creatively and personally, is there's that desire to like contribute, to live our story and to be part of other people's story. So I didn't really answer your question yet, but I just wanted to address that, because I think that's an important thing about listening, but as far as, the arranging thing, I mean, let me just say, and this links actually perfectly, because I've listened to a lot of music, and I hope that people these days are listening to a lot of music, right? Like when we grew up, it was like, we're sort of digital era, but we're also analog era, right? So we used to go to the record store and go to the library and take out albums. And, I remember, in college, like, hanging out with Chris Byers, the great New York alto player, and like playing ping pong and drinking beer and lining up like a whole stack of Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley albums, and Bird albums, and just playing ping pong and drinking beer and listening to all these albums. Like, we wouldn't talk. There would be no speaking. It would just be like doing this and really checking out the albums, and it's like, in this Instagram generation, and God knows there's like these incredible players who have like the brilliant technique, and maybe they're practicing the perfect lick 1,000 times, and then they go on Instagram and play it in 10 seconds. Like, what just happened? I get that. But I mean, I think it's really important, if one wants to create landscapes and, tell stories, that you have to be someone who is an avid listener and who experiences music through like putting on the album, not just the song, and listening to the whole album as an experience, right? And I think, Pat Metheny, certainly talked about how the Beatles, White Album and all that stuff, like the entry of the concept album, right? So many artists across different genres, it wasn't about the song and creating the hit song. It was about the album and listening to the whole thing, right? So, and again, people may not think that I sound like Pat Metheny, but one of the reasons why I consider him my main influence is that, going to his shows at the Beacon Theater at 16, it was truly an experience. I mean, it wasn't just guys sitting around blowing over the chords, which I love, by the way. I'm not saying that isn't an experience that I love to have, but I really felt like going to hear his group, and listen to those through composed compositions, and that involved different melodies and textures and percussion and Laume's playing his auto harps and all that. To me, that was, and even though I'm not necessarily doing that orchestrally, in my mind and in my own way, whether it's a solo arrangement or a trio arrangement, I'm trying to, tell a story and create an experience that's not just about blowing over the changes, which again, not a bad thing, really cool. But yeah, I mean, even as when I was in high school, I used to hang out at Augie's, which was the jazz club that Smoke was before it became Smoke. It used to be a dive bar. It wasn't. And like, I used to go see, I grew up with Peter Bernstein and Ben Monder and Adam Rogers and, I'm just thinking guitar players, Freddie Bryant, amazing players. And I would sit and watch them play trio, and maybe I'd get to sit in a bunch of tunes or something like that. That experience is so important to become, like an artist, someone who has like, you're not just playing your instrument, but you're saying like, what am I really trying to say here? What's my game? Who am I? And what do I want? Exactly. What do I want to get to? So anyway, I know that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I mean, all of that was from the heart. And I really hope that can be, if there are some young musicians out there who might be checking this out at some point,